अदर
हाँ
विल बी
बस
रिमूव,
अदर
फिर बाद में रिमूव करते, बाद में रिमूव कर लेंगे
हाँ
फिर।
बस नहीं।
हेलो, परफेक्ट 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 आ रही है। शुड वी स्टार्ट? हेलो, हेलो एवरीवन, एम आई ऑडिबल?
यस।
वेलकम फ्रेंड्स, today we have with us Mr. Keval Shah, CA Keval Shah. As you know, in this pandemic era, we are facing lots of issues going outside, and lots of offices, even business, are going on online. So today we are going to discuss the implication of GST on e-commerce transactions. And to guide us, we got a eminent speaker, Keval Shah, with us, who will be guiding us on these features. So I just welcome Keval bhai.
Thank you, Alpesh bhai.
To give a formal introduction of Keval bhai, I request Balaji to just take the introduction of the speakers today. Balaji, once the video stops, you just start with the introduction. Yes, Balaji.
Good morning, everyone. Introducing today's speaker, CA Keval Shah. Keval Shah is a chartered accountant, qualified in 2010 and graduated as Bachelor of Commerce from R.A. Podar College. Keval Shah currently is a partner at Consulting Edge and has handy experience of more than 10 years in indirect taxation. He's a regular faculty speaking at various forums like Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, Chamber of Tax Consultants, Bombay Chartered Accountants Society. CA Keval is a visiting faculty in various management institutes like SPJ and Indo-German Training Center. He regularly conducts training sessions for department officers of GST, organized by National Academy of Customs, Indirect Taxes and Narcotics and Regional Training Institute. CA Keval is a member of Core Committee of Indirect Taxes in Chamber of Tax Consultants. He has authored a book on GST impact on construction industry published by GST Practitioners Association of Maharashtra. With this brief introduction, let us all welcome today's speaker, CA Keval Shah.
Thank you, Balaji. Welcome, Keval bhai. The screen you can share presentations of yours.
Sure. Just a sec. Yes.
All members are requested to kindly rename their name with followed by the membership number and your name, so that our timesheets which you are preparing for CP Crate will be corrected properly. Keval sir, over to you. The query will be compiled by our committee members and will be shared at the end. Thank you, Keval.
Sure. Is the screen there, Alpesh bhai?
Yes, sir. Perfect, sir.
Okay, and I'm audible, right?
Audible. Perfect.
Okay. So we'll start with today's session. First of all, thank you, Alpesh bhai and the team, for giving me this chance to speak on a very interesting topic, e-commerce, because especially looking at today's scenario, you will realize that most of the business have moved on to electronic platforms to provide their services. Now, when we talk about e-commerce, typically when we go further into this topic, we need to see that how e-commerce has been actually defined under the GST law. That means how the lawmakers have envisaged or visualized the provisions of the GST law with respect to e-commerce. Uh, wouldn't be fairly complicated looking at the provisions which are there. Complication arises more so because of the transactions which are being entered. So we will be discussing the implication both ways. If you are a e-commerce business, then how do you take care of your compliances as well as the legal aspects? And suppose you are doing business through an e-commerce, even those implications are what we are going to discuss. So broadly speaking, as I said, we need to understand or we need to look at the scope of e-commerce with respect to the provisions which are there in the GST law. So the first question which comes in is, what is e-commerce? Now, when I say or when I ask this typical question, we are actually referring to a provision in the GST law. So in general, e-commerce is understood to be very widely when we talk about e-commerce as a business model. But when we look at the GST law, we need to understand what are the provisions which have been provided under the GST law. So first important definition which we need to see as far as e-commerce is concerned is section 244 of the CGST Act. What defines e-commerce is e-commerce means supply of goods or services or both, including digital products over digital or electronic network. Now, if you look at this typical definition, the first part says electronic commerce means supply of goods or service or both. Then they say including digital products over digital or electronic network. So if I have to look at this or rather break this definition, I will have to somewhere identify the important limbs of the definition. The important limbs are in the second part of the definition, which says including digital products over digital or electronic network. So we need to now understand what does these two difficult terms mean. So first term says including digital products. When I go further to see what digital product means, the GST law does not define digital products. So that brings in the first challenge, is what do you understand by a digital product? So a digital product is any product you sell online that doesn't have any physical form of substance. This is the general understanding. But to be very frank, if I ask my father, what do we mean by a digital product? He will say a TV is also a digital product. So that is what we have been understood as a traditional word, the digital products. Anything, generally whenever we use this term digital product, it signifies probably an electronic gadget. This was our general understanding which we had. Moving forward, when we look at the provisions of the GST law or a general understanding of the word digital product, we are actually aiming at any product that does not have a physical form or a substance. So for example, let's take a training activity, an online training recorded videos which are there, which I downloaded or electronically I just view those videos. This becomes a digital product when we look at the GST law. This is what the general understanding of a digital product would be. The second important aspect when we look at this definition is it should be provided over the digital or electronic network. Now that's the second challenge which comes in, is what do you mean by the digital or electronic network? Now here again the problem is it's not defined. So what do you mean by a digital or an electronic network? So just to quote you a very simple example, let's say I am a seller of a TV and I have my own website. So there will be people who will be coming to on my website. He will be either placing an order or he will be coming to me and placing an order. So there is a digital network on which the orders can be placed or bookings can be done. Whether this is what the GST law signifies. The question is digital or electronic network, the term e-commerce which we are referring to, is that wider to include all forms of communication which happens between the businesses and customers? The question may be probably answered if we go a bit further under the GST law. So first part, if you look at it, the e-commerce definition says it will include digital products which have to be provided through a digital or electronic network. The second important definition which comes in is there is something called as an e-commerce operator. E-commerce operator has been defined under section 245 of the GST Act to mean any person who owns, operates or manages digital or electronic facility or platform. Now here there is a challenge. See, if I just go back to one slide prior, here the wordings were digital or electronic network. Now if I have to look at this definition of electronic commerce operator, they say it means any person who owns, operates, manages digital or electronic facility or a platform. So here again, if you see, there is a disconnect between both the wordings which have been used. Thereafter, after using these words, they say for electronic commerce. So somewhere they are going back to the earlier definition which was there. So if I have to read both of these definition in sync, the wordings which are used in the electronic commerce definition ideally signifies a electronic facility or an electronic platform. So just to give a very, very simple example, we can take the example or the business model of Amazon or Flipkart that we have. So there typically what happens is there is a digital or an electronic platform which is created by a company, maybe Amazon, maybe Flipkart or some other example that you can take. They have created this network. Now over this network, there are supply of goods or services which happen. Moment both of these activities come together, this will be treated as electronic commerce for the purpose of GST law. Again, if I have to look at digital platform, that is also not defined in the GST law. So you will have to look at the facts and circumstances of each cases and then probably see whether this qualifies to be an e-commerce transaction or not. One very interesting question which comes in when we talk about e-commerce transaction. The first question which comes to mind is, today you might find that most of the products are marketed through WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram. Whether this will be treated as an e-commerce transaction or not. Now typically you will find a lot of the products are sent to you over a WhatsApp saying that we are dealing into these products. If you like any of these products, you can order with us and we will be delivering it to you through a courier mode or through a physical mode. So the question which comes in, are we looking at this as an e-commerce transaction? In my view, this will not be an e-commerce transaction. This is purely a digital marketing. So here what is happening is, it is as good as saying that I have a website. On my website, I have published X number of products and these products are sold in open market. And whatever money is realized out of that, it's a direct sale between me and my customer. There is no electronic platform which is involved in this entire transaction. And therefore, in terms of the GST law, this will not be treated as an e-commerce transaction. It may be an electronic medium or a digital medium through which I have sold a product, but this will not make it an e-commerce transaction. So just to set the ball rolling, you will find that there are a lot of businesses which may happen through website, which may happen through a lot of the products like WhatsApp applications rather, WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram. According to me, all of these are not e-commerce transaction. These are purely buy and sell transaction and covered under the normal course of GST law. Now let us look at what actually comes under the e-commerce transaction. Now, if you look at this e-commerce, this is, as I was saying some time back, this term is actually used very randomly and vaguely. A lot of people, like what I just discussed earlier with respect to WhatsApp, Facebook, a lot of people commonly use this term that I am doing an online business, but typically they are selling products or goods in terms of the GST law or a legal language. So there may be various models in which a e-commerce portal may work. Let us examine all of these models and try to understand the implication of each of these models. So let's take the first model in this slide, which says e-commerce portal involved in buying and selling of goods on their own behalf. So a lot of e-commerce company, especially to quote Flipkart, Flipkart has a business in India where they buy and sell products on their own, as well as they market the products of various other distributors over their platform. So these are two different types of models in which they work. So the first model or the first example which I gave, I am referring to a model where Flipkart is buying a product on its own, storing the product on its own, and wherever there is an order placed, he sells it on its own. There, probably when you look at the invoice, you will find that the invoice is raised directly by Flipkart onto the customer, and the entire transaction works in a P2P model. There is a principal to principal model. There is no third party which is involved. It's a buy sell model. It is as good as a WhatsApp sale which I discussed earlier, or a website sale which I discussed earlier, and a normal sale of goods which will attract the applicable GST rate on that goods. Similarly, you can have a e-commerce portal which is involved in rendering of service on their own behalf. Like initially we talked about buying and selling of goods on their own behalf. We can have a situation where services are given on your own behalf. Here again, the same logic will apply. It is as good as a service being provided by that person, and it will be treated as a normal service transaction and not an e-commerce transaction. Then comes the interesting part, the third and the fourth part, which most of us might be aware. This is how the entire industry works. Third one typically says e-commerce portals providing service as marketplace for other persons to sell goods. Now this is a very typical transactions where a lot of e-commerce company work. What happens is they create a platform or a digital or a virtual place where the buyers and sellers can come to that place virtually, and they crack a deal over the internet platform. So that is where what the electronic commerce operator or a portal does. He typically allows that the buying and selling can happen through his marketplace, whereas the activities thereafter, once the sale is happening, it is the responsibility of the distributor to sell, or to rather deliver the goods to the buyer or the customer. And this marketplace is merely acting as a intermediary. I have used this word intermediary very loosely. Don't link it with the definition of intermediary that we have. We will discuss this in some point of time. So here, typically, if you see here, what happens is the marketplace will just display the products of the various distributors which are there. Once the product or the sale is cracked, the distributor himself will make a delivery of the goods. The money may go to the marketplace. The marketplace, after deducting its share of money, will send back that balance money to the distributor. Fourth is a very interesting and the most prevalent practice which happens in e-commerce portal. So generally, if you look at the difference between third and fourth, it is very similar to have a marketplace. Now, in addition to marketplace, they also store or warehouse the goods of that distributors, and ultimately the packing of those goods and the delivery of those goods are also done by this e-commerce portal. So here typically you will find that they are not just bringing two people together. They are doing far more activities than just bringing these two people. They actually execute the entire delivery or supply process of the goods. So generally you will find what happens is, if you have to list a product, through these websites, they will have an arrangement to say, unless you have X number of products available with you, you cannot list that product on the portal. So you will have to typically save or store the product in the warehouse which is owned by this e-commerce portal. And then once the order is placed, the e-commerce portal only will pack these goods and deliver these goods to the final customers. However, the invoice will also be raised under the brand or the trade name of the marketplace, but they will identify the supplier as the distributor who had their goods stored, and thereafter they will charge the respective tax either as IGST or CGST and SGST. So just to summarize the discussion, the first two models which we discussed in the earlier slide were very much simple transactions, either a supply of goods or a supply of service, depending on the nature of transaction being entered. The third and the fourth transactions are typically the ones which require further more deliberation, that how we are going to treat this e-commerce transaction as. So here, if you see, here there are two models which we are talking about. One where I'm purely acting as a mediator, and the second where I'm doing far more activities than a mediator. I'm actually making the supply happen or operational. So if I have to look at the relationship, the supplier and customers come on this e-commerce website, and I'm typically discussing now of the fourth module. We need to understand that there are multiple activities which the e-commerce operator does. First, he displays the goods on the website of e-commerce. When I say website, I'm also referring to an application. So typically on any electronic network, whatever electronic network that e-commerce operator has, he displays the products of that particular person on that website or the application. Second, he is going to warehouse these goods or store these goods with the which is owned by the e-commerce operator. I mean, the warehouse is owned or rented by the e-commerce operator. Third step is they will pick up and deliver the goods. So in a lot of times you will find even the pickup from the office of the distributor till the go down of the e-commerce operator, that is also done by the e-commerce operator. Then there will be an activity of packing of goods. So if you will find, when you order through Amazon, there is a specific way in which the goods have been packed. So this packing activity is also done by the e-commerce operator. And finally, realization of payment. So whether it is a cash on delivery, whether it is an electronic payment, most of the time you will find that the payment happens to this electronic commerce operator, and thereafter, based on the understanding between the commerce operator and the supplier, the necessary money is remitted by the e-commerce operator to the supplier. Now here there emerges a very, very essential question, very, very important question, is what is the nature of this e-commerce transaction? Whether, first of all, whether these are multiple supplies which an e-commerce operator does, or is it a single supply, or is it a composite supply? These are the questions which emerge when we look at the activities done by an e-commerce operator. Now, in the third case, it is very simple to say, in the earlier examples which I gave, the third example was I was just displaying the products on the website. If customer wants to buy, they can buy. If the customer does not want to buy, they will not buy. Whereas when we look at the fourth transaction, you will find that there are n number of activities which are done. And I will just go one more step further to say that each of these activities which I have mentioned here, there is a separate charge for each of these activities. So therefore, when we look at this e-commerce, if your clients are dealing through e-commerce operators, you will find they will have an invoice which typically has various nomenclature. The first nomenclature, very common nomenclature which you will see, is called as a listing fee. Now that listing fee is charged by the e-commerce operator for displaying the goods on their applications or websites. Then there is warehousing charges which are charged by these operators, which is for storing of their goods for the period of time. Then there is pickup and delivery of goods, for which an e-commerce operator charges something called as an inbound or an outbound transportation. There is packing of goods. Typically, Amazon uses the word of gift wrap fee. Then there is realization payment. So all of these activities in itself have a separate charge or a separate consideration when we look at an e-commerce. Over and above this charge, when a sale happens, there may be certain percentage of money which belongs to an e-commerce operator. So the typical question which arises is, when we talk about these transactions, is this a composite supply? If this is a composite supply, in my mind this is definitely a composite supply, because there are more than one supplies which have been taken place, and all of these are so naturally bundled in the course of business that the industry as a practice does all of these activities in a whole. So the next question which comes in is, if this is a composite supply, what will be the principal supply? So here there are three important parameters which we need to see, and very, very relevant parameters. One, will we call this as a e-commerce transaction? So we will call this as a e-commerce service or an electronic platform service. That becomes the essential service, and rest all of the services are incidental or ancillary to it. Second, will we call this as an agency service? So will we say that Amazon is an agent of the distributor who facilitates, or rather I wouldn't use the word facilitate because that is there in the definition of intermediary. So is an agent who displays the goods of the principal, that is the distributor, and sells the goods on behalf of the principal. And third, an intermediary service. Whether the service is given by Amazon will be treated as intermediary service. Now, intermediary is also defined. So, looking at all these three definitions, let us first look at the definition of agent. It says agent means a person, including a factor, broker, commission agent, Del Creda agent, Arhatia, an auctioneer, or any other mercantile agent by whatever name you call it, who carries on the business of supply or receipt of goods or service on behalf of another. Now, the essential or the fundamental question when we look at an e-commerce transaction which comes in, is Amazon or a Flipkart or agent of the distributor? Any thoughts? Any of the committee members would like to chip in on this? Any thoughts on this? Will we call Amazon or a Amazon or a Flipkart a agent of the distributor? Yes, Alpesh bhai, you want to add?
No, nothing.
No. So,
No.
okay. So if you look at this, typically we had this issue even under the VAT law. Now, especially in Karnataka, there was a time when the Karnataka VAT authorities wanted Amazon to pay a tax on the sales which are happening through the platform of Amazon. Now, there what they typically tried to say is, whenever distributor puts goods at the warehouse of this e-commerce operator, the property now becomes of the e-commerce operator, because there are various restrictions which an e-commerce operator puts. And ultimately when sale happens, it is the e-commerce operator who is making that sale, and therefore e-commerce operator was asked to call upon to pay the VAT on that. So that is where they litigated this particular aspect, and finally it is being held that e-commerce operator is providing their independent services and they are not selling goods. Therefore, there will be a challenge to say that e-commerce operator is an agent. More importantly, when we look at an agency or a principal business, most of the times you will find that whenever there is an agent, the agent represents himself as a principal. So for example, let's say I'm a distributor of Hindustan Lever. So I will represent myself as HUL. So it's always that an agent will represent themselves as the main principal. Whereas if you look at this e-commerce transaction, it's ideally the reverse. It's Amazon who represents or functions under its own trade name, and the distributors are using my trade name rather. So it's not actually a reverse scenario. So therefore, it may be a difficult challenge to say that the e-commerce operator is an agent of the distributor. Then comes the second question. If he is not an agent, whether he is an intermediary. Now somebody will ask me, is there a difference between both of these? Typically, one would like to say that intermediary is a wider definition, when we look at the provision of GST law as compared to the definition of an agent. See, if you look at the definition, it says intermediary means a broker, an agent, or any other person. These are the wordings which a lot of people will harp into. Any other person by whatever name called, who arranges or facilitates the supply of goods or service between two persons. So here again there is an interesting challenge that that is where all this decision of VServe Global and have come into picture, where they have said that this is a much wider definition. Any person who arranges or facilitates a supply of goods or service between two people, he will be treated as an intermediary. So that is where all these BPO units were also called upon to say that your services are also intermediary services. So, however, there is one more way of reading this entire transaction to say that intermediary definition starts with the word saying that intermediary means a broker, means an agent, or any other person. So whenever these type of definitions come into picture, you can't read this word any other person out of context. There is a principle of ejus dem generis which says whenever these words any other person or any such thing will have to be read in connection with the words which are used earlier. It can't be just anybody and everybody in the world who will get covered by this. So therefore, if you have to read the definition in that manner, then firstly a person needs to be a broker and an agent, and then he need to arrange or facilitate the supply of goods. Then only he will be able to classify himself as an intermediary. If you look at my view, I would personally feel that when we look at e-commerce transaction, the GST law specifically has provided for a definition of e-commerce. They have specifically defined an e-commerce operator, and mind you, the definition is much different than the definition of an agent or an intermediary. Therefore, even the GST law envisages it to be a separate identifiable services. So therefore, just to conclude on this particular aspect, that if these services which are provided by e-commerce operator are concerned, this will not be a agency service, this will not be an intermediary service. These are e-commerce services in itself, and these are a composite supply where e-commerce services becomes the principal supply. Suppose I have to say that these are not e-commerce transaction, but these are agency transaction or an intermediary transaction, because what I am trying to interpret is intermediary is a subset of agency. So first you need to be an agent, then only you will be able to fit in the definition of intermediary. So if that particular view is taken, then there is one very interesting issue which is coming up. Is there is Schedule 1 under the GST law, CGST Act, which says activities which shall be treated as a deemed supply even if there is no consideration into this. So therefore, when I am as a distributor sending goods to Amazon warehouse, then this particular point will get triggered, which will say supply of goods by a principal to his agent will become a supply. So therefore, whenever I send goods to Amazon, I am supposed to charge the GST applicable on that based on this Schedule 1 entry. So this is going to be one very interesting aspect. If we treat Amazon as an agent, then the entire movement of goods from the distributor, the Amazon, that is going to be treated as supply of goods. And when Amazon further sells this, that will be an independent supply subject to GST at the rate of goods and will not be treated as service. So now, once understood the nature, let us now dig further into the rather compliances or the registration aspect when we look at an e-commerce transaction. Section 24 of the GST Act talks about compulsory registration. So there are specific people who are mandatorily required to get registered irrespective of the turnover criteria which has been provided under Section 22. So you will find that we have people like somebody who is liable to reverse charge. He is mandatorily required to pay GST, or rather register under GST, and not wait for the 20 lakh criteria. Similar logic applies for every electronic commerce operator. So if I am an electronic commerce operator, I am mandatorily required to register irrespective of the value of transactions which I enter. There are certain things which have been marked into red, which says who is required to collect tax at source under section 52. This TCS provisions we will discuss a bit later. So broadly speaking, any electronic commerce operator is mandatorily required to get registered. The second important aspect which might apply to most of our clients is a person who is supplying goods or services through such electronic commerce operator is also mandatorily required to get registered. Now this is another challenge. It is not just the e-commerce operator, but anybody who is providing services or goods through an e-commerce operator, there is a mandatory registration for them, except for two kinds of people. One, supplies which are specified under subsections 5 or section 9. I will come to that in a moment. Second, any service provider providing services through an e-commerce operator, he will be getting an exemption of 20 lakh rupees for the purpose of registration. So like today we have an exemption of 20 lakh for a normal service provider. That same exemption continues if you are providing supplies of services through an electronic commerce operator. But if you are supplying goods through an electronic commerce operator, you do not have any registration limit. So you are mandatorily required to register starting from 1 rupee. One more very important aspect when we look at e-commerce operator, that if you are supplying through e-commerce operator, then you cannot opt for the composition scheme. So section 10, which provides a composition levy as against a normal tax rate, that can be opted and subject to a condition that you are not supplying goods through an e-commerce operator. So if you are supplying through e-commerce operator, you are by default out of this provision. Now, this brings a very, very interesting question. What I said some time back is a person who is supplying goods through an electronic commerce operator, the 40 lakh limit that we have now for Maharashtra, that does not apply to him. So that raises a very, very fundamental question to me is, if let's say I have an old car and I sell it on OLX, am I required to get registered? Yes, anybody, Alpesh bhai, any thoughts on this?
Should be, sir.
Required?
Yes.
So everybody probably distributing or selling through an e-commerce operator, even an individual, will be required to be registered under GST. So here comes very, very interesting aspect is we are talking about the registration criteria. First, let us look at the levy. Let us look at section 9. Section 9 says GST shall be applicable on supplies of goods or services. Now, if you look at the definition of supply given under section 7, it says supply includes all forms of supply of goods or service or both, such as sale, transfer, barter, license, exchange, so and so, made for a consideration by a person in the course or furtherance of business. So if it is not in the course or furtherance of business, then there is no question of getting registration. So registration is a second criteria. The first criteria to be looking into is the GST law first requires you to be making a supply. If you are making a supply, then you are required to register. If you are not making a supply, then the registration criteria will never come into picture. Next important aspect, whether e-commerce operator shall require registration in all states. Now this is a very, very typical issue which an e-commerce operator faces. So you will find that they will have warehouses across all states. They will be storing goods in all of these states, and wherever they have a inventory, that inventory will be pushed as and when the order is coming. So this emerges an issue is whether they will be requiring a registration in all of the states where they have a warehouse. So here we look at two important definitions. One, a place of business. Second, the section 22, which talks about persons who are liable for registration. So what does the definition of place of business says? Place of business includes a place from where business is ordinarily carried out and includes a warehouse, a godown, or any other place where a taxable person stores his goods, supplies or receives goods or services or both. So here again, I go back to my argument or discussion which we had some time back, whether the services of an e-commerce operator is that of an agent, is that of an intermediary, or is that of a e-commerce operator service. If I say he is an agent, then ultimately what I am trying to say is the principal is giving the goods to the e-commerce operator as an agent, so that becomes a supply. When agent further distributes these goods to the end customer, that becomes a second supply, and therefore there is a need for registration of each such place where the goods have been stored. Why I am saying this is you need to look at section 22. Section 22 talks about registration. It says persons who are liable for registration, every supplier shall be liable to be registered under this act in the state other than special category state from where he makes a taxable supply. Now this particular aspect is very, very important. From where he makes a taxable supply. So we need to understand that an e-commerce operator sitting in Mumbai can conduct business all over India. So if I take a position saying that the nature of transactions which are provided by an e-commerce operator is not that of an agent, but it is purely an e-commerce transaction, then he may not be required to register in spite of having a warehouse in each of the states. But yes, that creates an issue, because when we talk about a warehousing service, typically you will find that it is an immovable property related service. So all his inputs will be subject to CGST and SGST, and that is where it may be beneficial for this e-commerce operator to obtain registration in each of the states. But if I have to legally look at this provision, in my view, if you are talking about an e-commerce transaction, it can be said that since the service of e-commerce platform are provided from only his registered office, the head office, and not from each of the states, then he may not be required to register in each of the states. So subject to ITC requirement, most of them have already registered with each of the states, and therefore that is how you will have to look at this particular provision. There is another issue which comes up is we will be discussing the provisions of tax collected at source in a while. But before that, there comes up an issue whether e-commerce operator requires special registration or a separate registration for the purpose of deduction of TCS. So in my view, yes. In addition to a normal registration of e-commerce service, there is a separate registration for the purpose of deducting TCS which is required, and this may create another challenge is, again, will I go to each of the states and register under TCS? So there was an FAQ which was released in September 2018 with respect to this e-commerce transaction, which says, as per the extant law, registration for TCS would be required in each state or union territory, as the obligation for collecting TCS would be there for every intrastate or interstate supply. In order to facilitate the obtaining of registration in each state, the e-commerce may declare the head office as its principal place of business for obtaining registration in that state where it does not have a physical presence. So here, as an e-commerce operator, you are going to typically have two types of challenges. One, first of all, you need to register in each of the states as a normal supplier of goods or a service. And second, you will have to register separately in each of the state for the purpose of deduction of TCS. So that is where this challenge may come up. If you ask me personally, I still hold a view saying that since the services of e-commerce can be provided only from the head office, that is this entire composite supply of e-commerce services, in my view, a single registration may suffice, subject to the input tax credit being an issue. What will happen to a foreign e-commerce operator? Now this will raise one more issue. Right now, most of us know that we are dealing through Amazon India. What if we deal through Amazon US, or we deal through Alibaba, which is a Chinese website? Here, the GST provision does not differentiate between a foreign e-commerce operator or an Indian e-commerce operator. they will be required to register same as what we talk about an Indian e-commerce operator. So again, if they have a multi-state registration, probably looking at the understanding of the minutes or the draft law committee which was there, they signify that they will be required to register in each of the state. So they may not have a PE or a physical presence in a state. Then they are required to appoint somebody who will be treated as their agent, and that agent will register on the behalf of the foreign e-commerce operator, and they will be required to be paying taxes. The next aspect which comes into picture is there are certain transactions of e-commerce which are covered under reverse charge. Now, if I just go back a couple of slides, if you see, I said that there are two exceptions. One exception was a service provider had a 20 lakh rupee exception. If you are supplying services through an e-commerce operator, up to 20 lakhs you are not required to register. The second exception is any other supply specified under subsection 9, subsection 5 of section 9. So there are certain transactions where the GST law says instead of all the distributors paying tax, I will consider the e-commerce operator as the supplier of service, and he is directly required to pay tax. So there are three types of services which have been provided under the GST law, which will typically be classified under these reverse charge activities. So first one, transportation of passengers by a radio taxi, by a motor cab, by a maxi cab, or a motorcycle, and the supplier can be any person. So what they are taking care of is, let's say there is Ola, there is Uber, there is CEO cabs. There are a lot of cab companies which work on an e-commerce platform. Again, understand one thing, the provisions which we are discussing is typically with respect to e-commerce transaction only. So if I am a normal transportation passenger vehicle operator, then these provisions will not apply. It will apply only if these are provided through an electronic network or a digital platform. So typically Ola, there has been litigation under the service tax era also to say whether the services are given by Ola or whether the services are given by the driver directly to the end customer, and Ola is merely a facilitator. So they had an issue where suppose I travel through a cab, I was charged 100 rupees, and 15 rupees goes to Ola, whereas 85 rupees is retained by the driver. So initially Ola was paying service tax on 15 rupees, saying that my share of revenue is only 15 rupees, and I am a facilitator or an intermediary between the driver and the customer. So I was supposed to pay on 15 rupees only. So that is where department raised an issue saying that you are only the provider of transportation service, and then you need to pay on the entire 100 rupees. So that is where this provision of reverse charge comes into play, saying that I am not expecting each of the drivers to get registered. Now, what I am expecting is this Ola operator, the cab operator, will register himself and he will pay the tax on all supplies which are effected through him. So similarly, second type of services which are there, which talks about providing accommodation in hotels, inns, guest houses, clubs, campsite, or other commercial places meant for residential or lodging purpose. Here there is an exception. What it says, any person who is supplying goods through an electronic commerce operator of this nature, in general the electronic commerce operator is required to pay tax, but there may be certain people who are already registered under GST. If they are already registered under GST, then the e-commerce operator will not pay. It is the same person who is registered that is supposed to be paying. So just to give you an example, let's look at Make My Trip as an example, or let's look at OYO as an example. Now what happens in case of an OYO? Most of the times it's the smaller lodges and smaller hotels which are associated with OYO, and they may not be registered under the GST law. And therefore, what the government or the GST law says, in each of these transactions, OYO is required to collect GST and pay GST to the government. However, let's take an example of Make My Trip. In Make My Trip, you will find that most of the hotels which are displayed through Make My Trip already have an existing registration under the GST law. So if reverse charge provisions are made applicable, this may create an issue because the hotelier will not be able to pay tax on this transaction. At the same time, moment there is no tax, it is possible to say that the input tax credit will not be allowed to a hotelier. So this entirely will break the chain. And therefore, what they have said is in these types of services, if the counter supplier is registered under the GST law, then he is not required to, then the tax is not required to be paid by the e-commerce operator. Then it will be paid directly by the supplier. If he is not registered, then it will be paid by the e-commerce operator. The third aspect which comes here, or the third type of services which are covered here, is services by way of housekeeping, such as plumbing, carpenting, etc. So here again the prime focus is on something like an urban clan. So a small scale work like a housekeeping activity, a plumbing activity, which is on a day-to-day requirement provided by a lot of small individuals, then the onus is pushed on the e-commerce operator. However, if a person is registered and is supplying through this e-commerce operator, then the provisions of reverse charge will not apply and he himself needs to pay this. So just to pictorially put this entire discussion, if let's say there is a registered hotel and you are booking through a Make My Trip and ultimately the customer books it through a Make My Trip, then in this particular case, reverse charge will not apply. The hotel will directly charge GST to the customer, and there will be an understanding between Make My Trip and a hotel where certain portion of money will be retained for the purpose of generally called as commission, and reverse charge will not apply in this case. However, the provision of TCS will apply. So in a moment we will go to the provisions of TCS. So TCS will apply, but reverse charge will not apply. A second transaction, if a hotel is unregistered and the supply happens through Make My Trip or a booking happens through Make My Trip, then the customer will be charged GST by the Make My Trip and reverse charge provisions will apply. So if your clients are dealing through this, you need to ensure that your GSTN number is registered properly with Make My Trip. If as per their records it is treated as unregistered, then they will collect tax, and most of the times you will find that you may end up having a double tax scenario. So that is what the provisions of reverse charge says. Then we move on to the provisions of TCS, tax collected at source. TCS typically, when we look at TCS, we have had this TCS under income tax also, where whenever you raise an invoice, what you do is you typically add up that much amount of TCS to the value of invoice and recover it from the customer. Whereas when we look at TCS under the GST law, it is actually a TDS. It is not TCS. So what the provision of TCS says, suppose an e-commerce operator has thousands of distributors who are selling through this e-commerce operator, and money is collected by this e-commerce operator. When this money is paid back or remitted back to these distributors, the government says you are supposed to retain some portion of that money and pay it as TCS. So they call it as TCS, but general understanding is TDS because your tax is deducted and not collected. So it's similar to way TDS works under income tax. So like we file in return for TDS, similarly we will have a return for TCS under the GST. Now let me just go back a bit. I had marked certain things in red which may help us to understand this. So here we said every electronic commerce operator who is required to collect tax under section 52. So here the reference of section 52 is what we are going to refer further. So when we look at section 52, which talks about collection of TCS, it says, notwithstanding anything to the contrary contained in this act, every electronic commerce operator, the first line is very, very important. Now this is something which may help us in understanding what we discussed earlier, not being an agent. Now if you recollect, we had this dispute of whether e-commerce transaction is an agency transaction or this is an independent transaction. So if I say this is an agency transaction, then the provisions of TCS will not apply. Then I am not required to deduct TCS. this is one more indication for me to say that these are separate services than that of an agency transaction. So this is one important factor. Second, they say they shall collect an amount calculated at such rate. Presently, the rate is notified as 1% in aggregate. So CGST will be 0.5%, SGST will be 0.5%. The third important aspect is on the net value of taxable supply. So in a while we will discuss what do we mean by net value, but the general understanding is whatever sales that you make through this e-commerce, the money which is going to be paid back to you, 1% of that money will be retained by the e-commerce operator and balance money will be transmitted, made through it by other suppliers. So necessarily only if the supply is made through the e-commerce operator, then only the provisions of TCS will apply. And more importantly, the consideration is also collected by the operator. So if all of these conditions are satisfied together, then only the provisions of TCS will apply. So let us now look at what do we understand by the net value of taxable service. Net value of taxable service has been defined again under section 52 itself, which says aggregate value of taxable supplies of goods or services or both made during any month by a registered supplier through such operator, reduced by the aggregate value of taxable supplies returned to such supplier during the said month. So typically when we say net value, what they are saying is all your sales less your sales return, whatever is the net value of sales that you have effected during a particular month, that will be treated as liable for deduction of TCS. Certain other issues which are relevant when we discuss TCS is the timing of deduction of TCS. So there is one question which comes up is when we are talking about this TCS, whether it should be deducted when a particular sale is made or when the collection of money is done. Because you may have a situation where sale may happen in 31st of October and the collection or the actual delivery, which is on a cash on delivery basis, may happen in the month of November. So the law says that the TCS deduction needs to be made at the time when collection, rather when sale is made and not when collection is made. The second issue which comes up is what will happen to an exempt supply. Suppose certain transactions are not liable to GST. Will still TCS be applicable on them? The provision is very clear. It applies only on taxable supplies. It does not apply on exempt supplies. So if it is a taxable supply, then only TCS will be applicable. Otherwise, TCS will not be applicable. There is one more issue which came up just some time back. We discussed on the provision of reverse charge. So suppose a hotel is unregistered and tax is paid by the Make My Trip. Now the question comes up is when Make My Trip is remitting this further to the hotel, whether they are required to deduct TCS. The answer is no. Once the tax is paid by the Make My Trip or the e-commerce operator, then there is no question of deduction of TCS, because the entire purpose of TCS is getting the tax beforehand and reconciling it with the difference or the amount specified by the suppliers. So here, once the tax is paid by the e-commerce operator itself, then there is no question of once again having the provisions of TCS. Next, whether TCS can be paid through ITC. So this is one fundamental question. The FAQ which is released clearly says that TCS needs to be paid in cash only. Now, entirely because of this, if you see, probably I feel the provision of separate registration for a telecom for a electronic commerce operator is made. So if I was being allowed to pay through input tax credit, then there was ideally no need of having a separate registration. They have somehow classified this separately and saying that it needs to be paid in cash only. Filing, there is a monthly filing in form GSTR 8. They will report the deduction of TCS and accordingly the credit will flow back to the concerned supplier. Annual return, there is a separate form, like we have a form 9 for most of the assessees. 9A applies for a composition dealer. 9B applies for an e-commerce operator. Interestingly, for the year 1819, they are liable to pay GST or rather annual return. However, till date, the form is not yet notified. So probably let's wait and watch how they are going to do the filing. Now, this takes us to the next issue is there are a lot of exports also which are happening through these e-commerce portals. So sitting here, I get an order from US through a electronic commerce platform, and ultimately the goods are posted to outside India. The issue which is coming up is whether this will be classified as an export. So initially, these exports provisions were tricky because shipping bill and all of these were happening on a consolidated level, and therefore it was a challenge to determine an export criteria for an assessee. However, now they have provided that e-commerce operators can export goods through a foreign post office. So FPO, presently this entire process is manual. It is not the same as that we have in IceGate, where entire process is transmitted electronically. Here it is a manual process. These exports are also treated as zero rated. Declaration is filed in PBE1, that is Postal Bill of Exports 1. Exports by e-commerce operator can be from any foreign post office, but if somebody is going from that MEIS licenses, then there is mandatory that it should happen only through these post office. There are also possible options that in case of small value consignments, single payment is received by the exporter. So the e-commerce operator clubs the payments for a singular month and a single payment happens to these exporters. So there also there is a separate form which is notified that you need to report this, and the benefit of exports will be given to the office to the exporters. Then we go on to one more sub part of e-commerce transaction. It's called as OIDAR services. Now, when we look at OIDAR services, it's actually a short form of online information and database access and retrieval systems. Now, what does this mean? It says services whose delivery is mediated by information technology over the internet or an electronic network. So let us understand one by one what does it mean. Now this is a very interesting aspect. We had one or two issues revolving around this. So let's take a situation. What do we mean by delivery is mediated by information technology? So we had a typical issue in one of the case where there was a production of a particular advertisement which was to be made. That advertisement was to be made for a foreign client, and that was sent through a FTP link or an electronic platform, so or a mail, let's say. So it was the contention that whether these services will be treated as an online information service. So here what it says, services whose delivery is mediated by information technology over the internet or electronic network. The second part is very, very important, and we also should not ignore this and, which says the nature of which renders their supply essentially automated and involving minimum human intervention and impossible to ensure in the absence of information technology. So this aspect is very, very important. There are two things which have to be taken into mind. One, the delivery of the service should be through electronic network. Second, and there shouldn't be any human intervention which should be involved. The nature of supply should be such that it is automatically done. So that is where comes in the challenge. So the example which I was giving of let's say a production of a advertisement which is to be given over an electronic platform or through a mail. Here the medium is definitely through an electronic or an information technology, but the nature of service does not make it essentially through automation. So that is where we need to understand this. To give more of a practical example, let's say all our services as a chartered accountant, filing GST returns for my clients, I am also delivering my services through information technology. It's over the internet only. There is no physical relation with most of our clients. Like for some of our clients, we are dealing with interstate. A Delhi based registration is also filed from here. So all my services are through a delivery through an information technology platform only. But this does not take me out or take me into this definition of OIDAR. The definition of OIDAR should be such that there is no human intervention. It's an automated process through which these services are provided. So just to give you more examples, what can fit in OIDAR service is, let's say there is a website. We have a website of, let's say, Taxman. We need to research the case laws. Now, when I need to research the case laws, I need not put a mail to Taxman saying I want a case laws with respect to this topics. I just need to log in into my account. I just need to search in the search tab and the answers will automatically flow in. So that is where the second aspect is very, very important and plays an important role, which says the supply of this service should be essentially automated and it should involve minimum human intervention. The one more example we can take is, let's say, this Shadi.com. Whatever details or information that you need will be readily available once you log in into your account and specify the details that you require. So that is very important when we look at OIDAR services, that it's not that any service which is given through an electronic platform will by default become an OIDAR service. The supply should happen automated through it. Then only it will be treated as an OIDAR services. Some of the examples which have been provided in the definition itself, which says advertising on the internet. Second example is providing cloud services. So we have this typical cloud services coming into picture now, because most of the offices are going on a work from home mode. So there are a lot of cloud services which are provided, where application can be hosted on cloud, the data can be hosted on cloud. All of these services will be treated as OIDAR services. Next, provision of ebooks, movies, music, software, and other intangible telecommunication network or internet. So all these examples of Netflix, Amazon Prime videos, all of these will fall here. Ebooks, you can have Kindle, you can have music softwares, all of this will be falling over here. Providing data or information retrievable or otherwise to any person in electronic form. Some of the examples I already gave, whether you talk about Shadi.com, Taxman, all of this will fall here. Online supplies of digital content, movies, television shows, music. So all downloadable content which is available, that is also an OIDAR service. Digital data storage, already discussed. Online gaming. So all these services are online information and database services. Now, what is the purpose of having this online information database as a separate subset or to an e-commerce? Now, one of the typical issues which we are facing when we look at this online information services is, you might have a situation where let's say movie is downloaded through, let's say, Netflix. Netflix may not be registered in India. I am a user using these services for my personal purposes. So in essence, this may also not qualify as a supply. Whereas when we look at a situation of a person who is supplying goods of a similar nature in India, then it will be treated as a taxable in the hands of the supplier. So at one way, there was a possibility to say that there was no reverse charge applicable when a foreign service provider paid tax. Whereas when an Indian service provider was supplying these services, this made it taxable. So therefore, you are making a domestic supplier non-competent as compared to an international supplier. So therefore, what they have said, when we look at OIDAR services, the OIDAR person needs to pay tax in respect of non-registered suppliers, whatever supply has been made, even if you are not a service provider in India. If you are a foreign service provider, you are still required to register in India. You are supposed to either appoint an agent or a representative who will register on your behalf, and you are supposed to pay the tax in respect of the non-registered assessee. If he is a registered assessee, then the provisions of reverse charge will automatically come into picture. Otherwise, the provisions will need to be taken care as a representative. Let us look at the next important aspect of place of supply, And then I have certain practical case studies with relation to e-commerce transaction. We will discuss those case studies. So when we look at place of supply, there may be two type of transactions. One may be a domestic transaction, one may be an international transaction. So typically, if you look at the IGST provisions, Section 12 applies in case of domestic transactions, and Section 13 applies in case of an international transaction. So again, going back to the earlier discussion what I had is when we talk about an e-commerce operator, whether I am treating this as an e-commerce service, whether I am treating this as an agent, or whether I am treating this as an intermediate. Now, understand one thing: when we are talking about domestic transactions, somehow neither of these services will make a difference. The domestic provisions or the exceptions which have been provided in subsection 12, there there is no exception which is carved out for an agency service, for an intermediary service, or for an e-commerce service. So all of these services by default fall under the provisions of section 12.2, the basic provision, which says the supply, the place of supply of these transactions will be taken as the location of the recipient. So whatever position I take in respect of the discussions that we had, the answers will not change if it is a domestic transaction. So suppose if I am an e-commerce operator, I am charging listing fee to a supplier who is in Maharashtra and I am in Karnataka, then I am going to charge IGST. If he is in the same state, then I am going to charge CGST and SGST, because the provision of location of supplier will determine the place of supply, and accordingly no implications on whatever positions I take. There is only one exception which is carved out in case of domestic transaction, is in respect of telecommunication service. Now if you look at telecommunication services, also most of the telecommunication services are provided through any digital or electronic network, and all of these are automatic, whether we talk about data services. So what they have said, in case of telecommunication services, the place of supply will depend on the type of transaction which has been entered. So they have classified telecommunication services into multiple aspects. The first aspect which they say is whether it is by way of fixed telecommunication line or leased line. If that be the case, then you have to look at the place where such lines are installed. So wherever that lines are installed, that will determine the place of supply. There may be a situation where we may have telecommunication line installed in multiple states. So again, there is a proviso to say that whenever multi-state operations come into picture, you have to apply a proportion by some reasonable manner where you can determine how much is accrued to a particular state. Second, if it is a mobile connection for telecommunication and internet services, which is provided on a postpaid basis, they say look at the billing address of the recipient. So whatever is your billing address as per the records of the telecommunication company, that is going to determine the place of supply. In case of a mobile connection which is through a prepaid basis, then whatever is the address of your selling agent, because here you may not be in a position to ascertain the value of each recharge qua the customer. It may be a general details available through the selling agent, and therefore look at the selling agent. If there is an online recharge done directly by a client, then take the recipient's address, that is the person who is recharging it. In all other case, by default, take the recipient address. So very specific transaction, not going much into detail, but just to look at it from a complete OIDAR service point of view, telecommunication services have a typical way of determining place of supply. In all other cases, the e-commerce operator services will fall under the general rule, and the provisions of CGST or IGST will apply accordingly. Now, let us look at international transactions. This is where some of the issues may come in. Now, suppose I consider this to be an agency or an intermediary service. What happens is when I say international transaction, first let us visualize a transaction that there is a foreign e-commerce operator operating outside India, and I am taking the services of that foreign e-commerce operator. So once I am taking that services, I need to go back to the earlier discussion which I had where I need to decide whether it is an intermediary service, that is an agency service, or whether it is an e-commerce service. If I say it is an intermediary service, then the place of provision says it is the location of the supplier. Now in this present example, the supplier is outside India, and therefore there shouldn't be any implications of reverse charge. However, suppose I say this is not an intermediary service, but this is an e-commerce service per se. Then again, one may need to understand that the provision of 13.3 is also very important. Will I be able to say that the supplies are such that, just a second, will I be able to say that the supplies are such, they are in respect of goods which are required to be made physically available by me to the supplier so that the supplier can provide this service? This is going to be a very, very interesting line of argument. See, what happens is all of the charges that we discussed, whether we call it as listing fee, whether we call it as warehousing charges, or any of the charges which are recovered, inbound or outbound transportation, packing, all of these charges can be incurred only if the goods are made available to the supplier. If I make the goods available to him, thereafter he does all of these activities and charges me, then there is a strong line of argument to say that these services will be classified as supplies in respect of goods which are required to be physically provided. Then the place of supply will be the place of performance of such service. And since I am talking about a situation of a foreign service provider, the provision of reverse charge still may not apply. However, if I am saying that the provision of this particular clause will not apply to an e-commerce operator, then it will get classified under the general rule, and the location of recipient will determine the place of supply. That is whereby we may see a potential risk of reverse charge coming into picture. As far as OIDAR services are concerned, I already said that these services to a non-taxable online recipient, the online OIDAR company is required to register in India and pay in India. However, it says the location of supply will be the supplier in the non-taxable territory. Therefore, in all these transactions, it is IGST that will be applicable, and there is no determination of C and SGST which is required. If they do not have a physical presence in India, they will have to appoint somebody as an agent in India. The GST law has a specific provision which says that whomsoever you appoint, there will be a singular registration for the entire country which can be made, and based on that you can pay the taxes. So let us take one very practical example now to understand this scenario which we have been talking about. Let's say I'm an Indian distributor which is supplying goods through e-commerce of USA. That e-commerce is registered in USA, say Amazon USA. What happens is I send goods to e-commerce USA. The goods are stored in the warehouse of e-commerce USA, and whenever there is an order, ultimately e-commerce USA sends the goods to the customer in USA. Now multiple issues come into this transaction. What are going to be the GST implication? See, a lot of our clients may have an arrangement with Amazon USA where I send goods today to Amazon USA. Maybe 1 month down the line, 2 months down the line, there may be an effective sale which may happen, or there may not be a sale, or the goods may be returned also. But let's take a very simple example where let's say the distributor today has sent the goods to e-commerce USA, and after a month the goods have been sold. The first question which comes up is, when I move these goods from India to this e-commerce warehouse outside India, will this be considered as an export? I am coming from the definition of export, which says export of goods with its grammatical variations and cognate expression means taking goods out of India to a place outside India. Very simple definition. Export means anything going outside India. So this is going to be one of the definitions or one of the transactions which we may have issues in further. Now, let's say if I treat this as exports, the second challenge which will come in is how do I report this in GSTR1? Because practically sales happen after a month and today the goods are moving outside India. So I do not have a value for it. Maybe somebody will say that whenever you are talking about export, it is happening through a custom frontier. And when it happens through a custom frontier, either ways you might have declared some value to the customs based on which a shipping bill might have been prepared. So use that value and report it in GSTR1. The next question comes in is whether I will be able to claim a refund based on this values declared in GSTR1. Tomorrow, there may be a possibility that these goods may not be sold, but coming back to India. So the issue which I am harping upon is whether we will treat this movement from here to outside India as exports. As the definition suggests, taking goods out of India to a place outside India is defined as exports. However, there is one thing which we need to see is whether Section 7 is triggered or not, whether this is a supply or not. Again, going back to the same arguments which I had for registration also, when you are talking about registration, first determine whether there is a supply. So if I am just giving goods to that person and storing goods with him, will that make it a supply? If no, then I have a view to say that this will not be treated as export of goods. In spite of there being a shipping bill filed, in spite of there being a value being mentioned in that shipping bill, it is very difficult to say that this will be export of goods. How to report such transaction in GSTR1? That is going to be a challenge in itself. What shall be impact of refund of ITC? Here, as I said, if this does not qualify to be an export, there may be a practical challenge to claim refund of this, because typically after 1 month, when there is a supply and the goods are outside India, that transaction may result in a supply, which is an export. But because of this mismatching of values in GSTR1, there may be a practical challenge for the claim of refund. Otherwise, your refund of ITC does not hamper. So till the time you are able to demonstrate your documents that export has happened 1 month later, at that point of time, the refund may be eligible. What shall be the impact of charges charged by e-commerce operator outside India to the Indian recipient? Again, the same logic which I was just giving earlier is whether you are going to treat this as an intermediary service. If yes, then no RCM applicable. If you are treating this as a e-commerce services, go further and see whether it will fall in that place of performance basket where services in relation to goods are supplied. Then again, no liability for RCM. But if you say no, this will classify under the general rule, then the provisions of RCM are going to be applicable. Let us take a couple of practical case studies so that we understand how this entire chain works. Let's take a scenario. There are multiple people involved in this entire transaction. There is a customer in Delhi. I am a supplier of a housekeeping service. There is an outsourced vendor, Delhi, and the supplier of housekeeping service, I am a registered assessee. So the reverse charge provision does not apply. So what happens is a customer through a e-commerce operator which has a head office in Delhi and registered in Delhi, the customer books an order with Delhi e-commerce operator. In turn, what happens is e-commerce operator informs the supplier that you are supposed to provide the services. Now, this supplier does not have a presence in Delhi. This supplier is, let's say, in Maharashtra. However, supplier has all India contacts or all India relations networks through which it can get the supply made. So ultimately, it outsources these services to a vendor in Delhi. Now, what happens is, practically speaking, the flow of service happens like this. The outsourced vendor of Delhi will go to the customer of Delhi and provide the services. However, when you look at the invoicing pattern will happen because this is an e-commerce transaction. though the invoice may be raised by this e-commerce operator, but the invoice is always from the distributor to the customer in Delhi. So therefore, you need to look at these provisions. IGST will be applicable since I am sitting in Maharashtra and the customer is in Delhi. The second set of invoice which will flow is the e-commerce operator for their services of e-commerce will charge IGST to this Maharashtra guy. As I discussed earlier, when we talk about domestic transaction, this will not make a difference if it is going to be an if it is going to be an agency transaction or is it going to be a e-commerce operator transaction. Third set of invoice which will flow in from the vendor to the supplier of housekeeping service, typically a bill to ship to model that we generally use in goods. On a similar line, the outsourced vendor is going to raise IGST. Now, because this has happened through an e-commerce operator, there will be provisions of TCS which will apply. TCS not only just applies interstate or intrastate, it applies to both. Since here the charging of tax under this particular transaction is IGST, the TCS will already be deducted as IGST. Now TCS does not depend on this, please understand. TCS is going to depend on this. If I am charging IGST to my customer, then in that case TCS will be IGST. So if this would have been a local sale, this particular transaction, then TCS would have been CNSGST. It does not depend on the transaction between the e-commerce operator and the supplier. It is for the money which is due to the housekeeping agency. So that is how practically the entire transaction structure will work. Let us take one more example where let's say there are more than one e-commerce operator involved. A very practical example. We have a website called as Trivago. It's a travel related website. Now, typically what happens is if you search anything on Trivago, it will not show you a property directly. Let's say if you want a property X, the property X, it will try to see what are the e-commerce operator proposing against that property. So for example, let's say I want to see Taj, Nashik Taj, where we had been in last year RRC. I check on Trivago, what is the rate of Nashik Taj? They will give me an option saying that Make My Trip charges 5,000 rupees, Clear Trip charges 6,000 rupees, Go Ibibo charges 7,000 rupees. And ultimately I decide if 5,000 Make My Trip is the lowest. So I decide to, through Trivago, I decide to book it through Make My Trip. So there are more than one e-commerce transaction which are applicable here. So what happens is, in both of these cases, since there is an e-commerce transaction applicable, the invoicing pattern will be something like this. First, since the hotelier is going to raise the direct invoice, assuming the hotelier is registered and the provisions of RCM do not apply. If the provisions, if the hotelier was unregistered, then in this particular case, Go Ibibo was required to pay tax and it would have paid tax accordingly. But here, assuming the hotelier is registered, then he is going to charge local CGST and SGST. Why local CGST and SGST? Because it's an immovable property related service. And since it is an immovable property related service, the location of immovable property is going to determine the place of supply. And accordingly, the local tax will apply. Then comes the second transaction where Go Ibibo is going to charge to the hotelier for the services provided by him. Again, since this is a local transaction, there will be no sense in even discussing whether this is going to be a agency transaction or whether this is going to be a normal transaction. He will charge depending on his location and the hotelier location, either CGST, SGST or IGST. Same logic goes for Trivago. He will charge either CGST or SGST or IGST depending his location and Go Ibibo's location. Next, there may also be instances where Trivago will charge to customers. This is very common when we look at this e-commerce platform. They charge something called as a convenience fee. This, according to me, is an independent charge or transaction between Trivago and customer, and none of the parties except for these two parties are affected, and therefore their relation is on a principal to principal basis, where Trivago will charge depending on the customer's location, CGST, SGST or IGST. One very important, the last part of my discussion is, here you need to see, since the TCS provisions are applicable because there is an electronic commerce platform, TCS will apply only in case of the platform which deals with the ultimate supplier. It will not apply through an electronic commerce operator to an electronic commerce operator. TCS will apply only in this transaction, whereby once TCS is deducted and the return is filed in GSTR 8, the hotelier will be able to see, after filing 8A, he will be able to see the credit in his electronic cash ledger. Once credit is flown in his electronic cash ledger, he can use this for payment of GST. He can also claim this money as a refund. Since the electronic cash ledger is as good as a deposit by you, you can claim refund at any point of time. There is no restriction to this. That sums up the entire discussion on e-commerce operator. We have time, so we can take up certain issues in connection to this. Alpesh bhai, from my side, I have covered up the e-commerce provision. Issues we can take up, discuss on.
Yes, Keval bhai. Keval, if you want to add up something for the information of the members, you can do it. Or there are around 6-7 issues raised by the members, which we can carry out.
Maybe we can take up the issues first, and depending on the time left thereafter, we can take up some of the
Okay.
other issues if we have.
Okay. Okay. Then I just request Sneha, just first of all, formally give a vote of thanks to the speakers today. And after, meanwhile, just share the screen of the queries which are raised by the members so that Keval can go through the same.
Okay.
Sneha, over to you.
Thank you, Alpesh bhai. Friends, it's not the strongest that survives, not most intelligent, but the most responsive to change that survives. The members, we are united by the common thread and common mission of pursuing the learning. Friends, you all will agree that CA Keval Shah covered his presentation in simple and lucid language. We are thankful to him for accepting our invitation and sharing his rich knowledge on the subject. I, on behalf of Mulund CACP Study Circle, present hearty vote of thanks. We are also thankful to each and every participant for joining via webinar.
Thank you, Sneha. Thank you, Keval bhai.
Thank you so much.
Keval bhai, always we always have a privilege to have you on our.
Thank you
with
so much.
us.
Thank you, Alpesh bhai.
Yes,
In
Keval
fact,
bhai. All this.
in
Yes.
fact, what happens is because of this lectures, you actually read a lot of provisions which you do not generally read in your normal
At
time. So,
100%.
to be very frank, I am the one who is most benefited out of this. So it's always a pleasure. So I'll just
Thank you,
take up the questions which are there. So whether SEO service is an e-commerce. So typically we are talking about a search optimization service which has been provided. Yes, according to me, that will also be treated as a e-commerce service. It's a service which is supplied through a digital network, not in essentially the e-commerce which we understand as far as the GST law is concerned. But if you look at even the definition of OIDAR service, that is quite wide to consider this as a e-commerce service. However, whether you classify this as a e-commerce, OIDAR or otherwise, according to me, this will not impact any of the transactions structure. Because if you say search optimization service is provided by a party outside India to a registered business user in India, then probably the provisions of reverse charge have to apply irrespective of the fact whether it is an OIDAR, e-commerce or any of the services. So therefore, this will not make a difference. But yes, I would feel this is an OIDAR service. The second question which has come up is, in case of a service via Uber, only e-commerce operator, that is Uber, has the right to pay GST. The person who has provided the car or driver will not be required to pay GST. Yes, correct. It is only Uber who has been made to pay as a recipient of service. I wouldn't say a recipient of service. Typically, the reverse charge applies even to person other than the recipient. So like in case of a transport, we may have a situation where transport is booked by X person and the transportation charges are paid by Y person. The Y may not be a recipient of that service, but still because under the law he is required to pay tax, he will be required to pay tax. Third, whether GST registration is compulsory for the LLP on royalty fees received from Amazon.com on sale of ebooks. So, firstly, we need to understand the nature of the transaction, whether this transaction is a e-commerce transaction or not. So, let's take an example. I have an ebook published on Amazon.com, and who is the seller of this book first needs to understand. What I understand is most of these transactions with Amazon, the company does not want to take the proprietary right of this particular document, because even let's say an example of a game, there may be some content within a game or this book which may have certain sentiments attached to it, and Amazon would not want to take up the onus onto that. So a lot of times the agreement is such that whatever sale happens, that seller is directly buying, or the customer is directly buying from the seller, and Amazon is merely an intermediary to provide these services. So generally the money flow is the reverse. So transaction happens is let's say X is a ebook holder, customer buys the ebook from X, Amazon is a middle person who who charges some money to you for sale of this. In that case, what will happen is, though my money will be received from Amazon net, so just to give an example, 100 rupees X sold the book to the customer through a Amazon platform, out of which 30 rupees was retained by Amazon and 70 given to you. In my view, it is not a royalty fees received from Amazon. It's actually a sale of ebooks which is happening from Amazon. If the sale is happening to a online recipient, then your OIDAR services will come into picture and Amazon will be required to pay tax. But let's say if it is happening through a normal business assessee, then you will be required to pay tax. And at the same time, whatever money that is remitted to you, it will be actually receipt for you and not your what do you say, it's a net receipt for you. So services are in turn provided by Amazon to you. So again, going back by the same principle, whether you want to call it as an intermediary service, then probably reverse charge will not apply because the location of supplier is outside India. If you call it as a normal services, then reverse charge will apply as a e-commerce operator. Next, can restaurants 5% without ITC can take credit of TCS deducted? Yes. This is not input tax credit. The 5% TCS, 1% TCS that gets deducted is actually a kind of TDS, that what we discussed. It is my money only, which has been paid by somebody else and then given me back a credit of that money. So it's a cash ledger hit, and you can claim a credit, that is while utilizing payment of your taxes, or you can also claim a refund. To avail cloud services, say Amazon, what taxes we pay, say GST, TDS? Can you please provide some guidance? So cloud services are nothing but OIDAR services. Clearly, GST under reverse charge will be applicable when we talk about these cloud services from outside India. If it is through India, then the normal service provider is going to charge you. I'm not very sure on the TDS provision, so I would not be commenting on that. Next is for sale or sale return. What additional compliance is required to be done or precaution to be taken by normal registered seller selling through e-commerce operator such as so and so? Whether person unregistered under GST can sell goods on e-commerce portal. So here, if you look at the GST provision, firstly, what we discussed were the registration provisions. The registration provisions under section 24 say that if you are supplying through an e-commerce portal or a platform, then you are required to mandatorily take registration. And therefore, most of the times you will find that these portals will not allow you to register unless you have a GST registration. So that is where this may be a more academic discussion. And according to me, if at all, if you have a situation where you are unregistered, then still there is an onus on you that tomorrow department may call you and register yourself and pay the applicable GST on sales which you have been made. Seventh is a very interesting issue which Sneha has just posted, is what will be the time of supply of goods from distributor to an e-commerce portal. So again, I am going back to the discussions which I had. First, you categorize the nature of transaction, whether you want to call this as an e-commerce transaction or whether you want to call this as an agency transaction. If you say this is an agency transaction, go to schedule 1. Schedule 1 says any supply of goods from principal to agent, that becomes a supply. Moment that becomes a supply, then your time of supply will be based on the delivery. So there, that point of time, you are required to pay tax. But let's say you take a position, no, this is not an agency relation. So ultimately what is going to happen is this is going to be kept at the warehouse of the distributor and sold a month later. So my time of supply arises a month later when the ultimate sale happens to an end customer, and the invoice which will be raised by Amazon will be to me, and the time of supply will be based on the periodicity that has been decided. So generally in this e-commerce transaction, you will find that these operators raise an invoice on a monthly basis to this distributor, and that monthly will be taken as the basis, and that will be the time of supply. In case of a Meesho e-commerce operator, suppose seller A list a product at 100, but there are reseller who add their margin and sell the product at 200 to the final customer. Seller gets consideration as per their price list of 100. So for seller, the state of reseller should be considered final while paying GST, or the state of end customer should be considered as registered. This is a very interesting issue. Here, first of all, I just go back to our discussions which we had. There are 4 types of products which we talked about, or rather 4 types of transaction what happens through a e-commerce platform. One, whether the e-commerce platform is buying and selling these products on his own account. See, therefore, you need to be very careful in the facts of the case. So here you said the seller lists a product at 800 and the reseller wants to sell this product at 200. So are we trying to say that this is a buy and a sell model? If this is a buy and a sell model, then this is actually not an e-commerce transaction. It is purely a trading of goods which we talk about, and whatever rate of tax applies on a goods will first apply to a seller at 100 rupees and thereafter to the reseller at 200 rupees. 200 plus GST should be charged to the final customer, and whatever has been charged on 100 rupees, that will be allowed as an input tax credit. Now, most of the times you will find that when we talk about these e-commerce platforms, they allow you to put your price in itself. It is not that they will determine the price. They will give you an option that these are the prices that you can put, which will help you to make a further sale. But generally the price is determined by you only. So therefore, if you have quoted 100 rupees, it is not going to be a situation where Amazon further is going to quote 200 rupees. So that is where, when you are talking about this reseller, probably we are talking about a buy sell model. And in that scenario, the normal rate of tax as applicable to goods will apply. This will not be a e-commerce transaction. Question number 9, for sale or sale return, what additional compliance required to be done or precaution to be done by a normal registered selling goods through e-commerce such as this? So yes, this is a part of the earlier question which was there. I wouldn't say additional compliances which are required, but let's say there are compliances of e-way bill. So that is one factor which you need to take care, whether the criteria of e-way bill is required for you. Second, if let's say e-way bill is not required, there will be a general way bill concept for a normal transportation lorry receipt. All these documentation should be kept in order to demonstrate that there is an actual movement of goods which has happened. And as far as sales return is concerned, so there is a credit note which is to be there. Again, the credit note needs to be backed up by a evidence that the goods have returned back, either in the form of a lorry receipt or in the form of a e-way bill. These documentation would be apt to be kept for the purpose of these. if a website developer is providing services to foreign party, what is the place of provision of service? Will this be treated as a export of service? Yes. In my view, this again is similar to like let's say a return filing for an NRI client. It is absolutely same what we do for a foreign client. It is a service which is provided from India to a recipient outside India. If I go to the provisions of section 13, the law says the place of supply of these transactions will be the place where the services are received, and therefore this will be treated as an export of service subject to compliances of other compliances under export of service definition. Like you have to receive the money in foreign exchange within a particular time frame. If that is met, this will be an export of service. If a person is registered under GST and supplying food and beverages by charging 5% GST, and also have own online website for supplying similar nature of goods to the end user, can both activities be done under the same GST registration? Also, what will be the rate of tax? So first question is very easy to say. Yes, definitely it can be done both ways. So like most of the restaurants, they have a dine-in facility as well as they have a takeaway facility. At the same time, they take orders through phone, they take orders through website. All of that can be definitely possible under the same registration. There is no need of having a separate registration. What will be the rate of tax? The rate of tax, as you pointed out, 5% GST. So it's a normal restaurant without a hotel. 5% GST will apply even for takeaways. There is an issue, partially a litigative issue to say whether that is supply of goods or supply of services. But as per the clarifications given by the department or the government, it will be treated at par with supply of services, which is 5%. Can sale of foods related items be sold by charging 18% with GST? This is one challenge which we have when we look at a restaurant industry. Is firstly whether we are saying is there an option? That comes the first question. Whether we are saying the restaurant as an option to either pay 5% and not claim credit, or pay 18% and claim credit. If you look at the way the wordings of the notification are, they make it clear that it is not optional. If you are falling in 5%, that you mandatorily have to go for that 5%. There may be a litigative view to say because this is a conditional notification, I may have an option to choose 18% without GST. But looking at the way the notification is framed, it will be a very risky proposition to take 18% with ITC. However, one aspect which comes in is very important, like the takeaway aspect that we discussed. Now, are we going to say even takeaway is a supply of service, or are we going to say it is supply of goods? Based on the clarifications given by the government, we are saying that this is nothing but supply of service and therefore paying 5%. However, one needs to be very careful in this part. Before GST, a lot of restaurants were not paying service tax on takeaways, considering them as sale of goods. Now, if you want to continue with that argument that this is sale of goods, when I give a takeaway, there are no services there, but it's purely sale of food, and it attracts 18% GST, there is a possibility to say that 18% GST along with ITC may be there. Sneha, can you drill down a bit down, or should I just look at the chat window?
It's done, Keval, I guess.
Okay, I think there are some chat windows. I'll just see if these are relevant.
There's one last question.
Okay. TCS provisions are applicable only to e-commerce operator. Yes, TCS provisions will apply only for an e-commerce operator. Again, there they have said not being an agent. So if you categorize a e-commerce operator as an agent, then the TCS provisions will not apply. As far as I am aware, the TCS operators do not want to call them as an agent. They have already had an history of litigation under the VAT law. They do not want to go into that. The second issue which I highlighted is there is a problem if you call him as an agent. The supply by the distributor to the agent, that also takes the color of a deemed supply under Schedule 1. So going by that, TCS provisions will generally apply to all e-commerce operator.
Alpesh,
Yes.
That's all for the queries. Keval, if you want to add up something, you want to any guidance which you can want to add it up, or else we can end up with the meeting.
Yeah, maybe I'm sure most of you might be aware that there is one interesting decision by Gujarat High Court which has come up. This was in relation to inverted rate structure. Now, just to give a background, the issue was something like this. The definition of inverted rate structure under the GST law is very typical to say that when your rate of tax on your inputs is higher as compared to the rate of tax on your output, then you are eligible for a refund because you are having a situation of overflow of credit. Now, here the challenge is, suppose, let's take an example. I am a job worker in respect of a textile. Now, job work of textile is taxed at 5%. So my outward supply is taxed at 5%. I may require various materials to do this job work. So for example, if I'm doing dyeing, if I'm doing weaving, there may be some amount of mill store which may be required. There may be some amount of chemicals which may be required, some amount of machinery spares which may be required. All of these inputs are either taxed at 12% or 18%. So typically you have a situation where my inputs are taxed at higher rate and my output is taxed at a lower rate. So GST law said, if you have a inverted rate structure, we will give you a refund. However, the refund was restricted only to the extent of your inputs which have been having used for these outputs supply. So typically the refund didn't allow for input services which are used for providing output services. And because of which, though the definition or the provision says it is inverted and you will be allowed to claim a refund, most of them still had a situation of accumulation of credit. Right now, what Gujarat High Court has said is, when we talk about an inverted structure, the definition has a flaw to allow only a refund of inputs. The definition of net input tax credit has been restated to be read as it should include not just input but also input services. So therefore, if you have certain clients on this count, of course, when I say it's a high court decision, it will not directly apply to all of you. It talks about reading down a rule. Now that will mean that it may not apply to all of you, but if you have cases where there is substantial amount of credit which is blocked on account of input services being there, then you can definitely venture out on this aspect and consider filing a refund claim for input services also. And thereafter, this may open up a Pandora's box in itself. Alpesh bhai, I think I am done from my side. Once again, sir, thank you very much for having me on this platform. It was actually a pleasure to be here. If there is anything, we can take it up or we can just end this session.
We can end up with the meeting, and thank you, Keval bhai. It's a pleasure for us to have you on our. Thank you, Keval bhai.
Thank you.
Balaji, please end the meeting.